Welcome. In this video, we're going to talk about Ssangsu Geombup 6 to Form 6, Part 2. You know the spiel. I'm wearing this uniform, again, not because, again, the form's not as up-to-date as I know it to be, but because, again, the interpretations and the nuances of the form I've kind of, again, picked up here and there, or are mostly my own brain juices, right? Obviously, again, just like with the previous video, you can probably tell there's one, I forgot my blank belt at home. So ignore that for today. Let's keep going. This is the first form that we're really introduced to just a wide range of new angles. So it makes things really fun trying to describe them virtually, right? So I'm gonna run through the angles first, and I'll just walk, I'll walk and talk as we, so to speak. So if we're here, we just did our thrust. We're gonna go 135, right? 135 to our left. So we're going to turn, cut, so downward cut, uppercut, 90 to our left, we're going to stab, 180 to our right, diagonal, 90 to our left, X block, 180 to our right, diagonal. This is, what is that, 225, shift all the way over. And then this is going to be a ridge strike going to a very high level. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So let's try that again from, so in case I started facing this way, it's the same idea, right? In case this is more fun, let's do it in radians too. So from here, if we do 3 pi over 4, right? Block, cut, up, pi over 2 or 90, pi or 180, pi over 2, pi, and then we're going to go a full, what's that going to be? So that's going to be, what, 5 pi over 4, shift over, and high strike. I'm going to try this another way as well, right? Degrees, radians, what else can there be, right? So let's do cardinal directions. We have to start in a weird way because that's going to make it ultimately a little easier. So we're here, again, for now, 135, so that's 90. That's 180, halfway between those two, right? And that is now our true north. So from north, we're going to go west, east, north, south, and then, I did not think this through, right? And then we're going to go all the way over here. I believe that would be, so if this was north, that is now northwest. So maybe that helped. Again, all of this makes more sense when I look from above, but those are 3 ways you can try to interpret it. Let's actually break down what you could be doing with those movements. The first move I kind of like. I'm going to start in a weird angle. I'm going to start facing this way so you can kind of get the full sensation. So you are striking me from this angle, right? So not only am I using the back of the sword to cover, I'm also evading, right? Which is kind of key, right? So a lot of times when we think about fighting, whether that's open hand, whether that's sword, whether that's spear or whatever, we forget you can just move out of the way. So we call that voiding a target, right? So I was here, I'm not there anymore, right? So voiding a target. So the idea is someone's giving me like a center cut or a diagonal cut or something from here. I'm both getting out of the way as well as using that back of the sword, ideally to catch throw, right? With a follow-up with a diagonal. Again, same side, which makes it really annoying to counter, right? Because if I was here, my sword was countered this way, it's easy for me to counter on this, this side, but this is the direction that I'd be countering from. So I like this one, right? So someone's coming in, you're gonna parry, strike, again using the bomsei both to draw back as well as to pivot, and you're going to follow up with an uppercut, right? Now that is aiming for the rib, right, underneath the floating rib. But you can also think about that as, again, if their body is now here, I can slice along the back. I can go low. Shin is a little low, but you can aim for the thigh, you can aim for the hip, and just wherever they're crumpled over, bop, right? And now you can either think about following up with a new strike to the same partner, right, if they continue stumbling in that direction, or you can be allegedly fighting people in all directions, which is a terrible idea, but let's go with that. Let's go with that first, right? So the way that I feel is the least appropriate, but the most common I hear is you're suddenly fighting 4 or 5 people. So I have stabbed 1 person, 2nd person, 3rd person, 4th person, 5th person, 6th person. So is that likely? Extremely not. Is it more likely you're fighting like 2 people? Yes, right? Because if you're surrounded by 6 people, they're not gonna do an action movie where each person very gentlemanly attacks you one at a time. They're gonna rush you, or they're gonna have longer range weapons and they're just gonna stab you from a distance. So yes, can you interpret that way? Sure. So let's go through some of those details in the event that you do want to think of it of that, right? So if I just stab this person, blocked, countered, feeling pretty good about that. So I could be stabbing 1 person, cutting the next person, blocking, right? Weird, right? There's another move that you can think about doing this as well, is you'll be catching them under the wrist as they're doing like a center cut, for example. So maybe you're catching on the wrist here and you're slicing through it as you cut behind you, also cutting someone, and then you stab someone and you're going to continue with the rest of the form. Again, convenient, but highly unlikely. So let's start to reduce the number of attackers to make it more applicable and more like stuff you can actually use, right? So this pretty standard, right? We've talked about it. I like that interpretation so far. And then we're going to turn into our either fenestra guard, if you want to think of it that way, so window guard, or just a standard like X guard, right? So one thing you can do is just go in with that thrust. Very unlikely, right? Because first of all, the range of this thrust is pretty short and it's heavily telegraphed, right? That'd be like me doing this thing and being like, stab, right? Very obvious. And it's like, okay, super easy to block. What's the deal, right? So one way I like to interpret it is maybe from here, you might be either using this as, as a counter, right? So making contact with their sword and then following with a thrust. Still not ideal, right? Because the ideal would be their sword's on this side, so I can rely on that guard, the guard, right, to follow up even if their sword's right there and pass right through, right? So from here, ideally, you can also think about that uppercut as striking a sword, for example, catching the sword in the guard, and then countering with a thrust, right? So that changes our previous interpretation, right? Where it's just the 1, 2. This might be cutting and catching someone's sword and then thrusting, right? So again, just adding another layer to that we can kind of play with, right? One interpretation that I also like to play with here is the idea of massive cuts instead of a 1-2, 1-2. So the idea could be, I'm here, I do just throw that thrust, I might catch underneath the armpit, for example, and I'm going to turn. This is less about cutting someone over there as opposed to following through with this person. So if I've thrusted, I'm going to blow it out here with a big cut, right? So again, if I caught him underneath the armpit, follow through. If I caught him underneath a piece of armor, follow through. Caught him, if I was really low, like under the leg, follow through, right? So the idea of, or just actually being successful with your stab. If you did land it, you're in the person, now you're going to cut it through as a follow-up, right? So Likewise, you can catch it here. You can maybe again catch underneath the arms, underneath the elbows, underneath the armpit, follow through, and then counter with another false edge strike. So that's yet another way that you interpret those individual movements. The next interpretation is spicy and weird, right? So I want to give you a little bit of context for this one as well. So there's a kendo kata, right, where we're here. So this person is in this jodan, right, this high guard. So the idea is someone's aiming for my wrist. I'm voiding both my body and my wrist by pulling back and then countering with that strike, right? So the idea of it is you're, again, voiding the target by getting out of the way and then striking. You probably see where I'm coming with this, right? So this is not how the form looks necessarily because of where the eyes are going, right? So if I just cut this person, I see someone not there, as I void, counter. Someone's coming over here, void, counter, and then this we're going to talk about in a little bit, right? So the idea of someone coming in, so this is also a mirror version of Posta di Donna in Fiore, right? We're coming all the way back here, right? This is the more common version. You can also do on this side. So facing you, if you're being weird with me and I was already here, voiding my arms, coming out this way for a quick shot, right? Noticing there's not much of a pullback. It's just a quick snap. There's the other one that I'm going into full Posta di Donna with a big counter. So increasing in power level as you also think about that voiding of target. So weird, weird. Is it likely? Not necessarily, but I like it just because of its weirdness. And before we move on to that last move, which I love, right? Before we move on to the end of that combination, I also want to give you an overview of the footwork, right? So one major part of forms is developing footwork. So with this X combination, so if we do our stab here, again, evade, coming back in, the main thing I want you to focus on is that lagging foot, making sure it nails into place before you move on to the next one. So like doing this looks silly, it's weak, it doesn't do much, right? Versus using the side of the hip to really drive forward. Again, pull that back foot in, right? Turn, right? Same idea, using the glutes to push yourself forward. Again, big old cut, back foot comes in. Back foot comes in. Back foot comes in, and then using the that back heel to strike into that person's temple or whatever is going on, right? So as a footwork drill, this is a really good one because it forces you to move in weird ways, but also emphasizes finishing that motion with a lagging foot. But let's finally talk about that last move, right? So I call this a ridge strike, right? Because there's a move in Taekwondo, they're called the ridge hand, right? Where we're using the, this is not the safe way of doing this, right? Where we're using the ridge of the hand to do a strike, right? So this is one of my personal favorites in open hand as well. So it makes sense that I probably love this one as well. So the idea is you're using the very, very tip, right? So again, when we think about thrusting normally this way, yes, there's a tip, but there's also the edge, right, that can help follow through. This is just stabbing them like essentially with a pen, right? So from here, using all of your hips, again, that snapping motion to drive it up into the target. What's the target, you might ask? So this is also that fun introduction of the way it is now taught is you're striking a horseman off their mount. Someone's riding in, you're just off to the side, apparently missing the horse because we stand horses here. But from here, you're up, you set up a pike for them to just, again, lance themselves onto, and they follow through, and you're going to dislodge yourself from there right after. So can you use it this way? Sure, right? Someone's coming in, again, using the nice geometry of tip to hilt to hip to heel. Ideally, all of that in one motion, in one line, so you have nice structure. So you can use it to set up a pike. Personally, I don't like the idea of here's a special case, right? I like the idea of like, hey, this stab is useful in a wide range of things. Why do we have to specify we're hitting a cavalryman, right? So what I personally like is keeping that about temple level. Again, in the form, ideally it is hitting above head level because that's where the more canonical target area is. But I think about hitting either normal temple level here or solar plexus level here because of what you might be striking. So for example, if that is just someone walking in and you just pop them, cool. If that was someone that we struck, that's the same area that we just stabbed that person. If they're like, for example, coming up, right, from prone, you can just be like, boop, and then you move on, right? So there's a lot of different target areas that you can be focusing on. The main way of changing that elevation would be obviously the hip and how deep your stance is, but also obviously this, right? So I just want you to be aware of target area, right? Whether or not it's the canonical one, think about where you're striking and have some fun with it. And one final point on that ridge hand strike or the ridge strike or the false head stab, however you want to describe it, is consider the weapon that we're using, right? So it is not a perfectly straight weapon, has some curvature to it. Meaning by utilizing that curve, you can actually go around someone's guard to some degree, right? This is not like using a kopesh, for example, where you have like a huge opening where you could just curve around. But if someone were silly enough to fight in normal guard this way, you could theoretically move around it as you're moving off to the side with that quick stab. You could do it, right? So that's just an added benefit to the type of sword we're using with that specific technique. And that's the middle of Form 6, right? So this is one of those that I know some people might be like, hey, I'm just going to wait until you have the whole form out so I can kind of like get an idea for it. But it takes some time to get used to those angles. So if you want to, I might recommend even like designate certain spaces in the room. Be like, okay, this is, you know, because there are coats over there, this is coat side, this is fan side, etc., etc. And keep doing that until you have those angles down so that when you do incorporate in the form, you can do a little more. But with that, make sure you stay safe, stay humble, and keep training.